No, I'm in Hyderabad. Hyderabad, just outside Canberra.
If only the Canberrans could claim that to be true.
Yeah.
It does look like we're on air, yes?
Yes, and Akshay?
Well, that's exciting. We're on air, and we've lost our host, which is super exciting. So we're all waiting here to be hosted, and here we are. We got our host back.
Perfect. So yeah, let's get started. Okay. Good morning, namaste, and welcome to everyone joining this LinkedIn Live organized by CIVOM. I am Akshay Bajaj, co-founder of CIVOM, founder of Global Learning Space Network, and I am here to moderate this panel as the precursor to the occasion of National Science Day that will be celebrated tomorrow across India. And this occasion is celebrated in the memory of the discovery of Raman effect. That was actually the world's physicist Sir C.V. Raman while working in the laboratory of the Indian Association for the Cultivation of Science, Kolkata. And for this discovery, he went on to win the Nobel Prize in 1930. And let's get started with today's session. The New Frontier, Science, AI, and the Safe School, a National Science Day special. Today's theme is celebrating National Science Day by exploring the shift from traditional labs to AI-driven inquiry. This session focuses on how school leaders can integrate AI as a tool for discovery while maintaining physical agility and digital well-being. We examine the science of 2026, where architecture, data-driven well-being, and academic leadership intersect. And with us, we have three eminent panelists joining us live. And the first one is Mr. Yogendra Patidar, also known as Yogi, who serves as the director of CIVOM. Then we have Mr. Phil Slade, who serves as the founder and CEO of Switch for Schools. And we also have Malcolm Nicolson, the head of school at Srinidhi International School. So now let's get started with the session where we have four themes coming up, and we have a volley of questions, a volley of interesting questions coming to our guest panelists where they'll have 5 to 7 minutes to answer those questions and share their perspectives and make it a very engaging conversation. So the first theme is redefining science for 2026. On National Science Day, we move beyond the Bunsen burner. We are looking at the science of the future. So Malcolm, as a leader of an IB school, how has the definition of a science lab changed in the last 24 months? Please share your perspective on the shift towards interdisciplinary inquiry and the science of learning. Over to you.
Okay, thank you, Akshay, and thank you everybody for the invitation. It's wonderful to be here with such an esteemed group from as far away as Vegas and other parts of India. So great to see everybody. Now, it's interesting that you mentioned the Bunsen burner. I was a science teacher before I became a desk-bound head of school, never meeting human beings. I was a science teacher, and the Bunsen burner is as relevant today as it was yesterday. Now, let's make that very clear. Whilst the shift in what the values, the attitudes, and the skills that we wish to teach through the sciences may be changing, the hands-on nature of science and the need for students to be able to do practical science work, whether it's with a Bunsen burner, microscope, or a beaker or a test tube, that is as strong today as it ever was. But what they do with it is different. Of course, now, back when I was young, and, I know Yogi and Phil are probably twice my age, but back when I was at school in the 1970s and 80s, we were... we followed a recipe approach. The approach to science teaching was a recipe. Do this, do this, do this, and then finish it and write a conclusion. The conclusion could have been written at the very beginning. Now, science is all about the thinking skills. How do we test various, multiple variables? What's a fair test? How do we hypothesize? How do we analyze data? So the shift is clearly towards thinking skills, which is more engaging and enjoyable for students in any case. But that's the shift. And these are skills that can be used across different disciplines. And we do see now that the lines between disciplines are increasingly blurred. You can't say this is a purely biological issue or a chemical issue. This is something that actually affects the real world. Geopolitics are as involved with the sciences as the humanities are, and what we can learn from literature. So we're seeing more interdisciplinarity than ever before, with a real focus on developing critical thinking skills, but also the scientists of today, how do we develop their creativity? So it's not simply learning about science, but it's learning to be creative through and with science.
It's good.
It's a very dramatic pause.
So
I have also studied theatre.
So we'll continue.
Sorry, the interdisciplinarity between pausing in the theatre and science.
Yeah.
It's extra drama.
I do love that. I do love that because I came from theatre myself. I used to be a composer in theatre, and this is very, you know, we always love in theatre the anticipation of that word, and so it's always lovely. I might just pick up from you there because I love that. I mean, I think as a psychologist, my father was actually a scientist, and he was my headmaster, and he was the head scientist, and he was a chemist. And I became a psychologist, which to him is almost like going to the dark side of science. You know, it was like, what are you doing? I was terrible at chemistry and these other things, but I went to the science of the mind. And I think my journey has almost been reflective of the journey of science, full stop, you know, where we went from this world where we're focusing on the external world, on physics, chemistry, biology, things that are external, and maybe going into our health a little bit, you know, and the science of health. And now we're looking at the science of attention and cognition and emotional intelligence. And I think one of the big challenges that we've got is how do we measure that, you know, because science is all about the observable, but observing consciousness, for instance, is incredibly difficult, and someone else's subjective experience and things like that. So I think part of the real challenge is redefining how we look at the scientific method in order to move forward into some of these more more ambiguous, I suppose, areas. And I think that's really interesting with AI because it's almost doing the opposite. It's more it's trying to solve something that's ambiguous and fluid and has so many dependent variables in what you're looking at. And AI helps us look at that complexity and start to pick through that in a way that where we can look at some of that for the very first time in a way that actually makes it accessible. But I think the challenge is remembering that things like AI are just one of the tools. You use the right tool for the right job. It's just a tool. It's a really cool tool, but there are all sorts of really cool tools that are enabled in the age of digitization and the age of technology and innovation. And you're right. I as a psychologist, I've worked for many years as a behavioral economist, and that link between the economy and the psychology and decision-making and mental health and the science of health and well-being is inextricably linked with communities and the evolution of communities and healthy communities as we get challenged. You know, our entire economy is likely to be completely challenged in the next 20 years. What does that mean for our education? You know, what are we doing with kids in schools if not no longer pathing them to a job, but pathing them to be able to release their own potential? You know, that's actually a fundamental difference. We would argue that we were always that, but how do you then track and manage how close somebody gets to their potential? That's a really interesting question, one that we've been looking at. But anyway, I've gone Ashki. I've jumped in, so you know. Took
at his pose, yeah.
Pause and just went for it.
I think
actually a lovely conversation going on. So one side of it.
Mm-hmm.
Also discuss on the human side of it. Phil, we have a question for you on the science of well-being. how behavioral data and AI now helps us track and support the internal state of the learner as they engage with complex technology.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the real question here is sort of lifting up from where I sort of just left off there on my little TED talk, and that is how do we approach this in a constructive way? You know, we like to be able to learn, we like to be able to investigate some of these areas, and I suppose you can't investigate these areas without looking at the emotional side of humanity and the emotions and how emotions impact with us all as humans. And as scientists, we've traditionally wanted to get rid of emotion, even in leadership and all these sorts of things. Emotion was seen as the thing that was stopping you making good decisions or stopping you being a good human being. And we now know that that's completely the wrong way to look at it. Emotions are the thing that unlock the way that we can navigate the world really well. So I think emotional intensity and learning better how we can look at our emotional and our reactivity and the intensity patterns, I think there are some of the things that we can start to measure. The challenge is that we can't always baseline those measurements across people, because sometimes it's about you being your own baseline rather than you saying where should we be as a culture as a baseline. And I think that creates a real complexity in the system, which is also fascinating, because now it sort of says it doesn't matter where you are. This is about how do we make things better. And it stops the judgment of the bell curves of below and above and the tails of the curves and things like that, which I think is fascinating. But then you've got cognitive fatigue, indicators. I think we know we can predict things much better now. We know that not eating well, we know that having cognitive fatigue, we know that doing different things in our routines, in our behaviors are going to have a lag effects. And so we can see some of those lead indicators rather than just trying to manage the lag indicators. And emotional regulation capacity is one of those lead indicators. And even how much agency somebody has on their situation. We do this a lot with burnout and looking at burnout in teachers and things like that. And yes, the external environment, because burnout is emotional burnout, right? It's about how much do you burn too intense for too long, and it's a big problem in education all around the world. And we're starting to realize that there's a lot more agency that somebody has in the management of their own energy. And that becomes something that we can actually start to investigate and manage. And it has a massive amount of implications or ramifications for all sorts of the way that we approach this, full stop, and even the way that we approach data. So how do we reinterpret the data in a new way? It's not just about are we above or below the line. This is about how do we get nuanced and individual approaches to data to lead for a mastery of learning, and that mastery can be on any scale, rather than just trying to look at the clump and the group and looking at whole numbers and averages and things like that. I mean, Yogi, Malcolm, I imagine you guys have got a view on this as well.
No, agree. I think the world is going to shift into, because of the AI or meta AI coming in our lives, I feel the whole goal of education is going to shift to self-elevation rather than occupation. Because if I can get aware of myself, my skills, my gift, or my school can help me get that to me. If I can get my own North Star, okay, then the kind of life I'm going to have would be very different. And I believe that's where the goal of education has to shift somewhere, because no longer we have that industrial mindset that we need to be skilled for certain machines. It is skilling for life. So James Martin, he's a futurologist, and he was talking about this period in 1980s. Okay, and James Martin was talking about human intelligence versus machine intelligences. Okay, he says machine intelligence is narrow but deep. Human is wide but shallow. Okay, so idea is when we have this wide interconnection, like you said, from social regulations to or emotional regulations to social behaviors to individual behaviors to a lot of skillings around us. Okay, we cannot go deep on those unless we try to experience or immerse inside it for a longer period. Okay, versus machines, your calculations go much deeper in complex levels. Okay, So
Yeah.
today, when we look at this, wide spectrum, interdiscipline is what going to help us figure out that individuality. Because I always give an example of someone who's designing, let's say, cameras for iPhones or Apple. What kind of skills or talent he would need, okay, or interest, or hobby, a passion for that. So that would be very different, and it's a very different kind of interdiscipline or transdiscipline required for that. Okay, so if you look at any exciting careers or life in future, what it needs on the professional level, what it needs on a personal level, that's what going to define us individually, in future. And that's going to going out of all those bell curves, out of this averages and masses mindset. So I think we are again going to this primordial age of self-elevating. Okay, and if a school can get us this idea of or help, figuring out our gift as soon as it can, okay, that's a real blessing, I believe. Because
So Malcolm, does that mean that the IB curriculum gets thrown out the door, and we're looking at a much more holistic thing? What are the implications for that? I mean, that doesn't seem that realistic, right?
And I think this is the way. Probably see the whole idea of we look at education today, and there are three key goals which I was talking to some education expert, and this is one of the school's goal is higher education admissions. Okay, skill development, and someone says is life development or lifelong developments. Okay, so which one is we're going to pick up? Okay, because if it's a human development role as a school, then it's a very different mindset and culture and values and everything around it. Because I'm not looking at his admissions, and I'm looking beyond those admissions in universities or further that. And that's where midlife crises or identity crises at the age of 40s or 50s start prevailing. Because I'm happy with my careers. Professionally I'm doing good, or the outcomes are great, but I may not be happy with what I'm doing.
Well, as a psychologist, we can talk about your midlife crisis a bit later, and we'll work through that. But Malcolm, surely this is interesting listening.
It is. I've just got my giant speakers. I've just switched them off, and my motorbike's just outside the speaking of such. There's big implications here, obviously, for IB curriculum and beyond, whether it's CBSE, Cambridge, or any other curriculum. What's important, and in the end, the backwash for any curriculum is how it's assessed, and the massive implications for assessment, and any sort of valid assessment that you're looking to do has to be rethought in this day and age, because within 5 years, I'm sure ChatGPT will be doing everything better than humans. It's not yet, I don't think, producing the level of work that our students can. But down the line, we will have to find ways to evaluate the extent to which children are thinking, learning, and think about why we're educating people. Are we educating people? As you can see, all this behind me: school mission, IB learner profile to become principled, compassionate, caring young people. To what extent are we achieving those? You certainly won't be able to work that out via any kind of existing assessment. So I think we have to start thinking about how we assess what we value. It's an old cliche: do we assess what we value or value what we assess? And I worked for the IB for 8 years. I got millions of cliches if you want them. AI you can give me some too. But this is it. In this time now, what are we really educating for? And going back to what Yogi said at the beginning, we've gone beyond the factory type of education, getting people ready to work in the factories or go to the front line. It's different. And I think that's where the assessment piece across the world has to change. What do we really think is important in education?
And I love the irony of AI is making us more individually focused. The individual learning pathways, you can see, are only nanoseconds away. Where you no longer have to have a class-wide curriculum. You could have it individualized, but at the same time, education is becoming more community focused. It's becoming like, look, it isn't just about our school community. This is about the community that our schools are sitting in and the impacts that we're having at a much broader level, which I think it's kind of deep and wide. And I was listening to somebody the other day where we were saying, people, even though we've had the calculator, and if you think about calculator as the calculator as an AI, we used to have people that were called calculators, and then we had this machine that could replace those jobs. But there's still exceptional value in us knowing our times tables. It hasn't replaced that skill, right? It's just it's nuanced it, and we know that when people don't know that, they don't navigate the speed of thinking even with those tools. And I think that sometimes when we come to this sort of technology, we underestimate the impact. We just think everything's going to be outsourced now, and that's not the way that life and humans work.
Yeah, and it's an agreement. So, that the social part of humans or Homo sapiens typically, what as individual we can achieve at home also, having all AI or setting up everything as a skill. But the moment we go with community and this social context is what makes us unique. There's a lot of decompression happens when we meet other humans. There's a lot of emotional, part which comes out when you have the community. Else, as an individual, we are still away from that idea of being alone can be a solitude. Okay.
I mean, there's actually a lovely line in the IB documentation, and I might be one of the few people in the IB community that's read most of it, because it was my job to. But the line that they use is, learning is a social activity. And that's a genuine belief, and when you look at the IB's approaches to teaching, which they believe across all programs, as well as inquiry-based, conceptual, contextual, it's about collaboration and teamwork. And again, as we talk about how learning has changed, when we were young, we were following science recipes and just following instructions and all that. These days, it's brainstorming, collaborating, creating together, which is one, more fun, and two, deeper learning. I like that idea that learning is a social activity.
But I love the fact that the technology as it is existing today seems to be driving us to more social interactivity. I think the narrative is always too much screen time, too much personal, too much hiding away. And actually what we're finding is that in reality, it's doing something quite different at a social level once the panic, I suppose, of what the new technology means starts to subside, we realize that actually what's happening is we're reevaluating what it means to be human, and we're starting to double down on that. And I think that's an incredible and counterintuitive impact that we're seeing of technology.
And it's also letting us, getting into a different discovery paths, because when a lot of secretarial or, executive functions can be done through technology, be able to think about which we have not thought yet, maybe beyond Earth, So there's a lot of things to look at, universal solar systems, and a lot of discoveries to be done by humans. Okay. Once you get away from this regular, political scenario of getting jobs and, economics worked around, there's higher discoveries which can be really thought of. Because, whatever we have been choosing to work in education is by, mostly governments. They're choosing what to be studied rather than, to make their nations worked around or economics, flourish around. But if you think of it, how do we, as a human, really start discovering, the frequencies and, whatnot? Because if technology is this path, we have more bigger expansions to look at.
Well, we don't know what the future is going to hold, right? I suppose that's the other thing. I think notoriously humans, the one thing that we're predictably good at is not being able to predict the future. And it doesn't matter how, much knowledge we have, how many hockey stick graphs we have, we're terrible at it. And we don't really know what the impact is. And I suppose going with either a utopian or dystopian view is kind of as silly as each other, because it's like, well, as we go, humans have got an innate ability to be ingenious. And I can't remember his name's not coming to me, but he loves the looking at that people tend to be either wizards or prophets. And the prophets say something's changing and we're all doomed and we've got to go back to the way it was. And the wizards say, we've got ingenuity. We'll be able to come up with some sort of magic that's going to our ingenuity as humans will always change it. And I tend to be of the wizard, not of the prophet, but I think there's an interesting interplay, particularly when you know that, to go, well, maybe there is we need caution, but also optimism. And balancing those, particularly in education, I think where we're not always so great at embracing change. Most of the time when we roll out things that are changes in practice, it's not a technology change as much as it is a change management process. Yes. We're managing the people that are going through that change, much less concerned about the technology, because without adoption, without embracing, without being able to navigate that open mindset to what is new, it's never going to be, it's just going to be painful, and that's what we don't need. I mean, Malcolm, you must be the world's greatest change manager in your role.
No, I think a very interesting part. We work with a lot of schools around India and other part of the world. I figured out kids are very easy to change. It's maybe we as an adult become little resistance to that change, because kids definitely flows or molds or shapes very fast. Whenever there's a change process coming in, they're okay to take that hope or optimism very fast. But it's adult somewhere has that resistance because they were doing certain things in certain ways in past.
I think the challenge is in a school like I'm in, it's an independently owned private school. We can control the rate of change. We can think strategically and plan it out, because as you say, adults do not necessarily wish to make change. You get used to something. I think my colleagues in state or national system schools probably have to deal with a lot more change management, government or diktats coming on a regular basis. And I think that's probably where the challenge comes in when the politicians change ideas. And I do know from my experience with UK heads that they could be looking at 50 plus memos coming in per month. New initiative. And it's possible to do that because our sole focus is learning, the safety of children, the satisfaction, enjoyment for children, and their learning. And there's so many distractions there. If you're constantly fighting change and having to help people to adapt to change, then you lose sight of what you're there for.
And you're holding the attitudes of the parents as well, obviously, in the hands as well. And sometimes that managing that change of their expectations, and I think all of us feel this, is that we are also looking at, well, what are the parents expecting us to be able to deliver to their children as well, and how much sort of currency do we have to be able to lead them into a new space whilst at the same time keeping what they also expect and managing that rate of change, which is politics 101 in a way. How do you lead but also represent the people that you're trying to lead in a way that doesn't make you too identity leadership is you still need to be representative of the attitudes of the people that you're trying to lead, and so you can't be too off-piste in order to be able to drive this change. And I think that's a fascinating space.
And you get accused by colleagues or by anybody, parents, of following fads or not fads. Many years ago, I was promoting mindfulness practices in schools, which I believe to this day are very usefully used and support students. But back then in 2010, when I proposed it, I was told, no, it's a fad, forget about it. It'll be gone. And the same when I was teaching in Bangkok in 2003-04, we introduced one-to-one laptops. And people go, no, that'll never catch on. No, that's ridiculous. And we took the risk. Everybody learned how to use them and so on. But here we are now today, 20 plus years later, and parents' concerns are now too much screen time. We like the preparing them for the future, but too much. So then you have to think, do we have non-screen days? Do we have screen days? Non-screen lessons, screen lessons? What's the value of handwriting? Because we started with Bunsen burner. We've talked about, times tables are important. Those things are important, but also stuff like handwriting. What's really important? And able to focus without a screen, without being distracted by screens. Areas of focus. So in terms of change management, when you bring it in, then you have to, you're looking for an equilibrium. It's like the predator and prey on the Serengeti, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, and the screen time thing is fascinating. I mean, when I grew up, and I did grow up in the 80s, it was all about watching too much TV was going to make your eyes go square. And my dad's got a great story. When the radio first came out, they thought it was the death of reading, because people are no longer going to read, and we're going to become, dumb robots, because we're just going to sit around the radio and listen to our stories and not be engaged with our brain. And I think we've got to come to a point where we realize that new technologies and new tools are just new technologies and new tools. But what I do think is interesting is that when adults, for instance, have a few moments spare, the anxiety that they feel with those pregnant pauses, all of a sudden out comes their phone, out comes their something. They've lost the ability to be able to sit in the comfort of their own skin and their own self. And I think this is Switch for Schools is about systemizing. How do we systemize the routines of our everyday to make us better and more human and more emotionally intelligent? And it's like you can kind of systemize that stuff out. And I think it's really interesting. You're right. Back in 2010, mindfulness was seen to be, particularly in the Western world, in some countries it wasn't such a revolution, because some countries have been doing that since the dawn of time, of course. But now we're starting to go, well, what happens when you go beyond that and go, this is actually about having control and agency and moving from what we call emotional intelligence to emotional agency, where we've got agency with what we've got and we can use it to navigate the world, not just try to suppress it like it's something evil that we've been fostered upon and have to suppress. And that's I think we can use the technology to be able to amplify that learning immeasurably if we stop seeing the technology as the good or the evil, but the use of the technology, which is the same can be said for everything.
Now, also one thing which I feel like you were mentioning about from a human side of it, how human-oriented education it can be, or in the setting up, because it's our whole education is not completely designed around humans. It's when we came from Industrial Revolution, it's everything is from industry's perspective. We already got in this AI and meta AI age. How human it can be. Figure out those issues of how we really learn as a human. So I just feel when we're talking about a lot of space design or those considerations, we rather try to look at like from Bunsen burners. It cannot go away, but rather can we make our classroom or school space more like in a studio version, where I didn't have to wait for a laboratory period. Like Malcolm was explaining about thinking skills, analytical skills, or can we think about problem or ideate about a problem or discuss about a problem before experimenting that? Earlier experiments were more like recipes. You have a predefined, experiments and predetermined results also. So you have to get those results. But today, if we get this real world relevance coming through human oriented behaviors in a studio-like approach, it may make more stronger sense. Because
Malcolm, are you finding that you're having to literally rethink your learning environments with this sort of shift in the space?
Definitely. It's all about collaboration. It's the social side again. We have perfectly decent science labs, for example, in this school, and students have been learning sciences very well, and everything's fine. But the space is dedicated to practical science, as it should be. But there also needs to be space where they can sit and look at each other in the eye. And these are specific skills that we were not teaching back in the 1980s, back when we all lived in a land down under. and a Vegemite sandwich. You know, back in the good old days of proper music, we were, again, it was taught in a certain way. Now students are learning to look for creative solutions to the world's problems, which, as we said before, are interdisciplinary. But maybe the design of the science labs that we have does not lead to that. So we need to be designing, and there's a lot of great educational, architectural designing, interior designing, seating so that students can feel comfortable looking at each other. But you have to teach those specific skills. You can't expect that an 11, 12-year-old knows how to collaborate, knows how to have ideas, knows how to disagree respectfully, knows how to be a leader or be a scribe or whatever, right? So I think yes, we've got to rethink the spaces, but in terms of the teaching, where we were really hell-bent on, C6H1206 plus blah, 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 it's still important, but it's also, you want to work in a team, right? This is team roles, and you have to absolutely explicitly teach children how to operate as young scientists or young humanitarians with each other. And these are specific skills that we must include in curriculum.
Yeah, and we've got a great example of this in recent history. My sons, who are now 22 and 24, they graduated high school right at the height of COVID when everything was locked down. And so they missed those rites of passage clearly out of high school and into university, where they had no sort of university experience, they had no social experience. And as we've brought people on and hired people out of that time as well, they're having to learn these social things, and they're starting to realize that. And I said right from the beginning, I never went to uni to learn content. I went to uni to learn life, right? And to learn these things, and even in upper high school, and to think that you can just learn by getting on a Zoom meeting or whatever we're on here. I mean, it's interesting content, but the learning is in the edges. It's in the silence. It's in the random. It's in the chaos. It's in the experiencing someone else being agitated at you, and what do you do with that? It's how do you look at the agitation for yourself and look at the escalations or impact that your escalations have on other people. And I think it's been one of the interesting things where I think, and I'm going to be a little bit controversial here. As a psychologist, I see a lot of autism and autism spectrum disorders, and they are very real. But I also see this middle ground of people that just are socially awkward because they've never learnt it, and they think that they're autistic. And it's like, actually, no, you just haven't learnt the rules of social behaviour, and you're okay. In fact, and this is you've got a pattern matching. You're doing all these sorts of things. I think it's interesting as a hypothesis to go, I wonder how much that COVID era actually negatively impacted an age group that missed that vital part of social learning and social behavior. And of course, we're humans and we're adaptable, and my sons learnt it either way, but maybe because of me. But I do think it's we've got a great little social experiment that happened globally, where we can see some of these effects that were going on and that weren't solved by technology, the way that I suppose the utopians thought it would, particularly in the height of COVID, So yeah, I find that fascinating.
And this needs all that, as a human, our moods and, behaviors kind of changes, every day, by something which we get impacted, and that gets into this. And social overloads or individual focus loads also becomes, or cognitive loads also becomes challenges. And I always feel when you have a space or the area which can help you get a deep focus, or you can have a decompression from things where you are more socially actively engaged in not a cognitive systems, or maybe you have agile social systems also. So you have to have all that mixed together, that an individual can choose between. So today at a workplaces, or in the future, any individual goes, or if you look at life in the workspaces, okay, you have a lot of individual orientation,
And I think what we're trying to do, right, is we're trying to build the external architecture in order to be good for learning, and we're trying to build the internal architecture, the emotional architecture for learning. And it's kind of like now that's kind of become the focus of education. And strangely enough, technology has sped that
Yes.
that shift in focus up, and I think a shift in focus even in the parents. I mean, Malcolm, you must be seeing a shift in parents' expectations on this just in the last 4 or 5 years.
There's always the challenges with shifting parent focus, but you can imagine it is a challenge. I mean, but you have different generations, right? And we're all working with young people who are different generations. We're different generations, and it's you have teachers who are of a different generation, parents of a different generation. They have different expectations of how we relate to the world. I mean, I've just been working with our grade 5 students, so 10, 11-year-olds who are really determined to change the world, so much so that they brought in people who are taking blood.
I love it.
This is right. This is what children are like these days. They don't want to just learn about stuff. They want to do something with the stuff that they're learning. And this is a bunch of 10-year-olds have led to this, which is wonderful. And the expectations of parents now is not. I mean, many will obviously still want us to have their children who learn a load of stuff and then do an exam, do really well in an exam, and go somewhere else in the world where they can also learn more stuff and do more exams. Yeah. But we do have a very significant number of parents these days who are really concerned that at school, more than anything else, their children are safe and happy. Yeah. And that's different. My parents certainly didn't care that I was happy at school. No. Now it's, are they safe? Are they happy? Are they enjoying? And if they're enjoying and they're happy, then the learning will come. And we're seeing parents now, because of the generation that they are, who do see the world in a different way. And they're focused on values and attitudes a little bit more than 5 years ago.
Yeah, and I can see a bit of a shift. Back in the 80s when I went to school, if I got punched in the face, my dad would say, "What did you do to deserve it?" Back in the 40s, if I got punched in the face, my mum would be, "Who did this to you?" And how can what was the injustice? And I am seeing a shift now where people are going, "Oh, I got punched in the face." Well, what's happening in the environment to even allow that to happen in the first place? And I do see that subtle shift happening. And it's funny where I think it's coming from the kids. I don't think it is coming from the parents. And I think it's because a lot of the work.
No, I think it's a both way. I myself is a parent today. Okay, and I have 2 girls. When I look at people or colleagues, and I come from 2 different dimensions. Being a parent in a IB school versus visiting, IB schools or other schools around India. Okay, so there's different perspectives. So a lot of time there are different. Resistances also. A couple of parents I feel are overloading, or they're just offloading their parenthood to schools. They expect that a school would take care of everything around it. Okay, because they got both the couples are working. And in India it's a very different dimensions versus in Australia, because you got helps and everything available. So their life is at a different stream on it. There are a few parents who's really socially connected to kids, making what necessary or needs or guidance needed for that. So, there's different category of parent expectations around it. Okay. It changes very well, again, between if you are coming from a nuclear family or a joint family in India. Okay. A lot of that cultural system is also coming across it.
Yeah.
And, then there are layers around it. It's just not, could be just a white or black. It's a lot of gray in that thinking, actually. But of course,
going back to what we said before, we want to teach thinking skills. If students are going to be good scientists or literary artists or whatever, they have to learn to be critical thinkers, creative, and all those kind of things. Some of the other big areas, we want students to be resilient and to be independent, and to have opportunities to learn those things and to then become them and demonstrate them. Now, the double-edged sword here of the families that you mentioned, a lot of the children are so fortunate to have so many people providing them with love, guidance, and support in their lives. But they also have so many people then telling them what to do, what to think, and what to believe in.
Agree.
And so it's a double-edged sword. When we want young people to be independent, some of them never have the chance to be independent or resilient because they're not allowed to fail. And here's the other big one that we really need to be teaching young people is how to fail well and how to bounce back from failure. And to accept failure is a part of life. It's part of the learning process. But if you have a great big safety net at home, there's less opportunities for you to have failed or to even have ever heard the word no.
Well, any prep teacher that's alive at the moment knows that the first time that some prep students hear the word no is in the classroom, and all hell breaks loose. It's like, what? You said no? And it's one of the big challenges. I think it's interesting though that I think that's where. I mean, we know from the Dunedin experiment, these great longitudinal experiments, that the thing that is the difference between people becoming successful in life and not is not how smart they are or how rich their parents were or what cultural background they came from or even what marks they end up getting in school. The difference is their level of emotional intelligence, right? Like the research keeps telling us this, and it's like it's just taken us 40 years to kind of get the message and go, oh, that is the point. And instead of us looking at AI and these other technical things as whether we should embrace them or not, it's like the question should be, do we have the emotional security and architecture to fully integrate with something like this? Because it's going to ask a whole lot more of us than we ever thought that it would. It's going to re-examine who we are as humans, and we're going to have to navigate that, and we have to do it with a high level of emotional agency within our systems. I think that's what's going to be the difference between those that succeed and those that don't, at both at a collective level, a company level, at an individual level, at a relational level for parents and communities as it goes forwards. But that's my TED talk. That's my stump speech.
No, I think I agree. I've been in for my whole life. I started boarding at 6th grade. Okay, and from there I could be in the boardings only. I never gone back home with my parents and staying with them. And I understood one part that what Malcolm was saying about that, you have a safety net at home, but once you become independent thinker, you thrive differently. Because you get to see all that path and decision making and the responsibility and accountability of taking those decisions and continuously working towards making them right around it. So, and that's a very different skill set, which you can probably not get if you are not individually there. And that's something which has to be part of design in education somewhere. The moment you become individual, because in India, a lot of kids could not cook. Okay. Versus if you go to the part of the world, they may be serving as, waiters or everything. We have a lot of those differences in thought processes also. So I think that exposure has to be part of design also at the same time.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Actually, I'm aware that we've just gone off piste and sort of done our little thing. Maybe out of fear of the anticipation of the gaps, but do you need to bring us back into line?
Yes, actually,
of course, that turned more into a podcast rather than a live session. But yes, there were many good points that you all mentioned about. So I was suggesting Yashmi on the phones alongside that. Yes, we should start a podcast series rather than these live sessions. People are enjoying them a lot. So yeah, when Malcolm and Phil told that yes, when kids hear no for the first time in the class, that reminded me of a meme that you must have seen. Wait a minute, who are you, right? So yes, so now we have a final theme coming up, where we are going to ask you the final question before closing this session. It's upon the future proofing of the campus and the one prediction that you will make. And what is your one prediction for the school of 2030? Malcolm, over to you.
Oh, just a small one then. Thank you.
Yes, please also consider the point of physical safety and digital well-being from the viewpoint of a parent as well as an educator.
I mean, the future in learning is agency. It's learner agency. Also agency for teachers, because the satisfaction in teaching comes when you are the curriculum designer and you are meeting the needs of the children in front of you, not meeting the needs of children all around the world who you're not teaching. So the one-size-fits-all approach, I think, will start to disappear, so that we can actually address the children that we're teaching. So agency for teachers, agency for learners, so that they have some control over what, how, where, when, and with whom. So I think agency is the big area. But going back to what we said before, in terms of a revolution, I'm not sure that we'll have a revolution. I think it's more of an evolution, which I know will be controversial to some of our friends in the US. But it's more of an evolution, because we're not throwing away the Bunsen burners, we're not throwing away the microscopes, but we are changing the accent of how we learn and how we learn in the science, and we are thinking about the development of thinking skills, creative skills, resilience, empathy, compassion, and so on. And that's where we're moving, is more values, more attitudes, more skills, less obsession with content and stuff. And it will be students that will lead this, not governing bodies or governments. So that would be my prediction for 2030.
Yogi, over to you about this question.
No, if you talk about 2030, the kind of signals I see, which is needed, or the prediction which is needed for the schools and the campus and the behaviors, I feel it has to be as dynamic as the world outside, because that's where real world relevance would come down to the classrooms, where I think the classroom has to work as a live labs. Okay, we are preparing students for the future outside. Okay, and that has to be done in the way that the future outside is, or how the outside looks like. It is very dynamic, it's very challenging, it's very collaborating, social, individual, emotional, all of that. All those aspects has to come down, like Phil was explaining. We had to build a right hardware and right software together. There has to be this culture, people, all of that has to, or programs or curriculums, all has to connect to the physical space also. So hardware and software has to rightly align to make that as dynamic as the world outside. Because if I see those parts in today's workforce, when they come, we are been teaching them competition, you are expecting them to collaborate in the workplaces. It cannot happen in a single day, because you have grading systems and inferiority and superiority complexes, and the moment you come to a workspace like ours or any other workspaces, or you are expecting them to collaborate, they don't have a mindset. They cannot. So like Malcolm was mentioning, that this kind of training and skilling is needed, how to be socially active. And that's something which is, I feel, has to be there, and it has to be in both the senses, be it from a architectural viewpoint, well-being viewpoint, or the cultural viewpoint. All that has to integrate very strongly to make or give them that platform of they can experiment the real life sciences or their real life psychology or everything in that place. So yeah, that's what my take would be.
Thanks, Yogi. And Phil, what's your take on this?
Look, I think science. I'm hesitant, as I said before, of predicting anything, because we're, as humans, the one thing we know is how bad we are is predicting the future. But I'm going to anyway, so let's give that a crack. But I do think we can learn from our history. I mean, science is all about celebrating discovery, right? The great discoveries that we're going to discover over the next 5-10 years are going to blow our minds. What we can do now that we didn't think we could do a year ago are going to blow our minds. And I think it doesn't necessarily mean predicting what those discoveries are going to be, but just celebrating the process of discovery is what's going to get us ahead. And I think this is about that critical thing and those sorts of mindsets. But the greatest discovery is not what machines do. It is what humans can become when they understand and direct their emotional systems in a digital world. I think that's going to be the real space. This is what we're doing in Switch for Schools. It underpins everything that we do at Switch, because science is evolving. To Malcolm's point, I mean, everything is evolving, and we've got to evolve our mindsets with it. I'm constantly stunned. You look at the education system of the 1980s, and you wouldn't even dream of comparing it to the education system of the 1950s. And yet we're in the 2025s, and we're still comparing it to the education system of the 80s and 90s. I mean, it's insane, right? The world has moved on immeasurably more in the last 3 to 5 years than it did in the 3 to 5 decades in the 60s and 70s and 80s. And we have to change that, but it's about celebrating that discovery, and we've got to sit in that space of celebration, because I think when we don't have that agency that Malcolm was talking about, we don't have the emotional agency to be able to understand how we can navigate that, then anything that new is going to be seen as threat. And we're not actually we're not judging whether the new things are good or bad. All the new things are bad just because they're new, because they're threatening and they're novel, and that's the way that our brains are kind of wired if we're not in check of our own sense of agency. And I love this concept, and we've said agency probably 100 times in the last 5 minutes, but I think it's so relevant to the shifting mindset of education, of where things are going. There's an individualness to it, but at the same time, there's a collectiveness to it. It's like it's both at the same time, and I think that's where I think the future is going to be, and that's who's going to win in the future, the people that can do that the best.
Of course.
Oh no, here he's back. He's back.
No, I think there is a very unique quote. Someone said, we are teaching 21st century kids by 20th century teachers in 19th century classrooms.
That's pretty good. I like that.
Please write that down. That's cool.
So, that need to sweep around. That need those directions of agencies and individualism and collaboration together.
I love it. I think HK, have we landed like with 2 minutes to spare? We've done very well. I think we've done okay, haven't we?
No, you all contributed very great insights. And to everyone watching us live, if you have any questions or doubts about the insights that were shared by Malcolm, Yogi, and Phil, please leave your questions in the comment section, and they would be very happy to guide you on that front. And to our guest speakers, Yogi, Malcolm, and Phil, many thanks for joining this LinkedIn Live and sharing your insights. Malcolm as an educator and a school leader, Yogi as an entrepreneur and also someone who is into designing of learning spaces, and Phil, who shared a lot about digital well-being and how kids can be supported, and also on managing the screen time and what has been going through the nations everywhere across the globe. So yes, this was what things we had in store as a precursor to the celebration of National Science Day. And we'll soon meet on the occasion of Women's Day, where I guess CIVOM is bringing very special LinkedIn Live very soon in the coming month of March. And till then, keep your curiosity up. So as Steve Jobs told, stay hungry, stay foolish. Thank you for everything.
Thank you.
Thank you, Malcolm. Thank you, Phil.
Thanks, guys.
It's great.
Good job.
Yep. And we all could not be at Women's Day, probably because.
Yeah.
Sure. See you guys. See you soon.
See you. Thank you. Great to meet you. Thanks.
Thank you. Great speaking with you.
See you guys. I don't actually know how to hang up.